Hello everyone, in today's video I will be narrating stories that I found off of Reddit. If you enjoyed this video, make sure you subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But without further ado,
let's get straight into these stories.
I used to work retail at a store inside a mid-sized shopping mall. It wasn't anything fancy, just your standard American mall, 2 floors, a food court, and a mix of chain stores that were slowly dying out. I worked the evening shift, which meant closing up around 9 p.m. and heading out through the back employee entrance by 9:30 at the latest. One night, I was the last one out. My manager had left a little earlier, trusting me to close on my own. No big deal, I had done it plenty of times. I locked the store, took the long hallway to the back exit, and stepped out into the cool night air. The parking lot was mostly empty except for a few scattered cars, probably belonging to janitorial staff. I fished my keys from my pocket, ready to head home. Then I heard it, a muffled dig. It was the distinct sound of the mall's main entrance automatic doors opening. I glanced back. The front entrance, all glass and usually well lit, was now dim, but the doors had definitely opened. I stood there for a moment, watching. They didn't close right away like they normally should. They just stayed open. Now, I knew for a fact that the mall closed at 9. Security would do one last sweep around 9:30 and then lock the doors. No one should be going in or out, especially through the main entrance. Maybe it was a janitor, maybe security had stepped outside for a smoke break, but I didn't see anyone. I should have left. I should have gotten in my car and driven home, but there was this gnawing feeling, like a hook in my gut, tugging me forward. I took a few steps closer, just enough to get a better look inside. It was mostly dark. The only lights still on were the faint emergency ones near the ceiling, casting the interior in a dull, yellowish glow. And yet, even in the dimness, I could see the stores, the kiosks, the empty food court. Everything looked normal, but it wasn't normal, because the music was still playing. You know how malls have that soft, mindless music playing over the speakers. That weird, slow, instrumental pop mix meant to keep people shopping. It was still going. And then I noticed something else. The escalators were still running. They weren't supposed to be. I had walked past them on my way out, and they had been still, as they always were after closing. But now, they hummed softly, carrying nothing but air to the second floor. I took another step closer. That's when I saw it. A figure. At first, I thought it was a mannequin. It stood near one of the benches in the main walkway, completely still, its posture unnaturally stiff. But as my eyes adjusted, I realized it wasn't plastic. It was a person, just standing there, not moving, not blinking, facing my direction. I stepped back instinctively, my heart hammering. Something was wrong. I could feel it in my bones. My stomach turned, my body screaming at me to leave. But before I could move, the lights flickered, not like a power surge, not like a normal electrical glitch. It was like someone had turned them off and back on purpose. In that half second of darkness, the figure disappeared. I didn't stick around. I turned and sprinted to my car, fumbling with my keys, hands shaking. I didn't even bother looking back. I just needed to leave. As I peeled out of the lot, something told me to look in my rearview mirror. I wish I hadn't. The mall doors were still wide open, the lights inside were still flickering, and at the edge of the entrance, standing just outside the glow of the emergency lights, was the figure, closer than before. I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw the figure standing there, unmoving, waiting just outside the mall's glow. I kept telling myself it had to be a trick of the light, maybe a security guard messing with me. But deep down, I knew better. The next morning, I drove back to work, stomach tight with nerves. I half expected the mall to be different somehow, to see that something had changed overnight. But when I pulled into the parking lot, everything was perfectly normal. Shoppers moved in and out. Employees smoked near the back entrance. The doors that had stayed open too late last night were working just fine. I told myself I had imagined it. That is, until my manager pulled me aside. "Hey, weird question," she said, stirring her coffee. "Did you see anything strange when you left last night?" I froze. "Why?" I asked, trying to sound casual. She sighed, rubbing her temple. "Security called this morning. They're asking if any of us stayed late because, well, someone was in the mall after hours." A cold wave washed over me, like an employee. Though, her voice lowered. "They checked the cameras. Someone was just standing in the walkway near the food court, not moving, not stealing, not breaking in, just standing there." I swallowed hard. What time was this? Around 9:45. That was exactly when I had seen them. I wanted to tell her. I wanted to say I saw them too. They watched me leave. They knew I was there. But before I could, she laughed nervously. Guess the cameras glitched, though, because when security zoomed in, the person just disappeared. I didn't laugh. I spent the rest of the day trying to pretend everything was normal. Customers came and went, coworkers gossiped, and yet, I felt like something was watching me. That night, I refused to close alone, but even with my manager locking up beside me, I still felt it. I didn't look look back, neither did my manager. We both heard the automatic doors open, but neither of us turned. It was instinct, like our bodies knew something our minds couldn't process. We walked faster toward our cars. I could hear my manager fumbling with her keys, hands shaking just like mine had the night before. I don't even remember saying goodbye. I just dove into my car, locked the doors, and started the engine. My breath was coming fast, but I refused to check my mirrors. I didn't want to see if something was there. Instead, I pulled out of the lot, driving faster than I should have. As I neared the exit, I saw my manager doing the same, speeding off in the opposite direction as if neither of us wanted to admit what just happened. That night, I kept my bedroom lights on. The next morning, I was seriously debating whether to call in sick, but I knew that would just make things worse. More shifts, more nights, more chances to be there alone. So I went in like nothing had happened. At least, I tried to. The first thing I noticed was that my manager wasn't there. Someone from another store told me she had called out sick. That should have been my first clue. The second clue, security came by our store. A heavyset guy named Ray, who usually didn't give a crap about anything, walked right up to the counter and stared at me. "You were here last night," he said. It wasn't a question. I nodded slowly. "Yep." Closing shift. His eyes flickered, like he was debating something. Finally, he sighed and leaned in. "Listen, I don't want to freak you out, but we checked the cameras again." I didn't want to hear this. I really didn't want to hear this, but my mouth moved on its own, and Ray scratched his chin. "We saw the figure again." I swallowed. "Same spot?" I asked. Ray shook his head. "No, last night, when you and your manager left, it was closer." The chill ran down my spine. "How close?" Ray hesitated, then glanced around like he was making sure no one was listening. "By the doors, like right by the door. But here's the thing." He paused, lowering his voice. "The doors never actually opened." I frowned. "What? We heard them open?" Ray continued. "Even on the audio. But the cameras show them shut the whole time. They never moved." I felt my stomach drop. Maybe a glitch. I offered weakly. Ray gave me a look. "I've worked here 10 years. That ain't a glitch." I felt sick. "So, what do we do?" I asked. Ray exhaled and shook his head. "Nothing. Security isn't paid enough to deal with. Whatever this is." He turned to leave but stopped and looked over his shoulder. "Just don't close alone." "Yeah." I nodded, even though I had already made that decision. Over the next few weeks, I avoided closing shifts. I picked up extra hours during the day and swapped whenever I could. If I had to stay late, I made sure someone else was with me. But one night, there was no avoiding it. It was a Sunday, and my coworker called out last minute. My manager wasn't there, and nobody could cover. It was just me, alone. I tried to move fast, locking up as quickly as possible. My hands were shaking as I flipped the switches, shut the gate, and took the back hallway to the employee exit. I would not go near the front entrance. I told myself everything would be fine. I told myself the cameras glitched, that Ray was exaggerating. But as soon as I stepped outside, I felt it, that feeling of being watched. I forced myself to keep walking, one foot in front of the other. Don't turn around, don't look. But then, the sound of the front doors. I couldn't help it. I turned, and I saw it. A figure standing just inside the dimly lit mall. No face, no features, just a dark outline of something too still, watching me. And then it stepped forward, not in a normal way, not like a person walking. It was gliding, closing the distance too fast. I ran. I don't even remember unlocking my car. I must have, because suddenly I was inside, slamming the door shut, shoving the key into the ignition. I looked up. The figure was at the glass doors now, but they were still shut, still locked. It was inside. I didn't wait to see what would happen next. I floored it, tearing out of the parking lot like my life depended on it. I quit the next day. I don't know what I saw. I don't know if it was always there or if I had just noticed it that night. But I do know one thing. The mall is still there, still open, still playing that soft, mindless music. And sometimes, when I drive past late at night, I glance at the entrance. The doors are always shut. I've been working at this tiny, middle-of-nowhere gas station for about 6 months now. It's one of those 24-hour places that sees almost no traffic after midnight, just the occasional trucker stopping for gas and maybe an energy drink. The graveyard shift is easy, if not a little eerie. The road outside is quiet, the single overhead light hums faintly, and the glass doors reflect more darkness than anything else. It's a lowly job, but I don't mind. At least, I didn't. Last night, something changed. I was restocking the fridge near the counter when I heard the bell above the door jingle. I glanced up, but the store was empty. No one had come in. The doors are automatic, and they only open when someone physically steps on the mat outside. The wind can't trigger them. I know because I've tested it during storms. Still, I stepped around the counter, peering through the glass doors into the dimly lit parking lot. The pump stood empty, no headlights in sight. Weird, but I chalked it up to a malfunction and went back to work. A few minutes later, I heard breathing. Not my own, not some subtle background hum of the refrigerator. This was deep, labored breathing, like someone trying to hold in a wheeze. It was close, too close. I spun around, my heart nearly stopping. Then what? I checked the aisles. Nothing. I even walked around the store, checking behind the shelves, behind the counter, even the stockroom. I was alone. Still, the breathing continued. It was like it was just behind me no matter which way I turned. I checked the security monitors. The outside cameras showed nothing but the dark road. Inside, I saw myself standing there, staring at the screen. The breathing didn't stop. I don't know how long I stood there, frozen, waiting for something to happen. But then, the monitor flickered. For half a second, the feed went static. And in that flicker, just before the cameras returned to normal, I swear to God, I saw someone standing right behind me. I turned so fast I nearly knocked over the chair. There was no one there. The breathing, however, was louder now. I did the only thing I could think of. I walked outside. If something was in the store, I wasn't about to stay trapped with it. The second my shoes hit the pavement, the breathing stopped. The store fell silent. From outside, it looked just as empty as it always did. Shelves stocked, fridges humming, security screens showing nothing but static now. But as I stood there, heart pounding, I noticed something. The automatic doors hadn't closed behind me. They just hung open, the darkness inside stretching longer than it should have. I don't know how long I waited, but eventually I got in my car and drove off. I didn't quit, not yet. I spent the entire next day debating whether I should even go back to work. Quitting was tempting, but bills exist, and small town jobs don't come easy. I told myself I was probably just exhausted, imagining things. Stress does weird things to people, right? Still, when my shift started at 10 p.m., I walked in gripping a wooden baseball bat like my life depended on it. The store was exactly how I had left it, clean, quiet, normal. The security monitors were back to functioning properly, no more static. The doors, they worked fine, and maybe I'd overreacted. By 2 a.m., I had almost convinced myself nothing weird had happened at all. Maybe the cameras really did just glitch. Maybe the breathing had been an air duct. Maybe I'd been awake too long. And then, at exactly 2:33 a.m., the store radio crackled to life. The thing is, we don't have a radio. At least, not one that plays on its own. The speakers in the ceiling are meant for store announcements, but they only work if I press the microphone behind the counter. But here it was, faint static, followed by a voice. It was low, distant, like someone whispering through layers of distortion. My blood ran cold. It didn't sound like a normal radio broadcast. It was slow, careful, directed. It was talking to me. I didn't answer. I just stood there, gripping the bat until my fingers ached. Static swallowed the voice for a few seconds. Then something new. A laugh. A slow, dragging chuckle. Not amused, not friendly. Just, Rug, you left the door open last night. I swear my heart stopped. I hadn't told anyone about that. I hadn't mentioned the doors not closing. The radio went silent. The store fell deathly still. I backed toward the counter, reaching for my phone. Just as I unlocked it, the overhead lights flickered, and then they went out. Total darkness. Only the glow of the security monitors remained. I didn't breathe. I didn't move. Then, footsteps. Not from outside. Inside. I couldn't see, but I could hear it. Slow, dragging footsteps moving from the back of the store toward the aisles. I held my bat so tight my arms trembled. Then, I saw the monitor flicker again. The back camera. For a split second, a figure appeared between the shelves. Unmoving, too blurry to make out details. Then the screen flickered again. It was closer. Another flicker. Closer. Another. Almost to the counter. I turned and ran. I don't even remember getting into my car. I don't remember driving home. All I know is that I locked every door in my apartment, shoved a chair under the handle, and sat in the corner of my room until the sun came up. I called in sick today. I don't think I'm going back. But the worst part, I checked my phone this morning. I had a new voicemail. I didn't sleep. I sat in my apartment, every light on, clutching the baseball bat like it would do anything against whatever this was. I told myself I was being paranoid. Maybe the voicemail was some kind of weird glitch. Maybe I'd imagined that figure in the store. But that breathing, it wasn't just some random noise. It was the same deep, strained breathing I'd heard that night in the gas station. It was close, and it was real. By morning, I decided I'm done. No more gas station. No more night shifts. I quit. I texted my manager. No response. Fine, whatever. I wasn't about to walk back in there to hand in my notice. But as the hours passed, something gnawed at me. What if I was losing it? What if if I just needed to see the store one last time in daylight to prove to myself it was all in my head. It was a mistake. I pulled into the lot at around 3 p.m. The sun was bright, the sky clear. The gas station looked perfectly normal. Relief started to creep in. It was just a store. But then I noticed something. The automatic doors, they were wide open, and standing just inside the entrance was my manager. Except something was off. He didn't move, didn't acknowledge me, just stood there, arms hanging limply at his sides, staring straight ahead. I hesitated, then finally called out, "Hey." "Oh, I quit." Nothing, no reaction. I took a slow step closer, feeling my stomach twist. His face, it wasn't right. His skin looked too tight, like it had been stretched the wrong way. His mouth was slightly open, lips pulled back over his teeth, as if he was trying to smile but didn't quite know how. And his eyes, they weren't focused, like he wasn't really there. Then he took a breath, deep, slow, familiar. I felt every hair on my body stand up. It was the breathing, the same one from the gas station, the same one from my voicemail. I turned to run, but his mouth opened wider, not like a person, like something unhinging. And then he spoke, but it wasn't his voice. It was mine. He left the door open. I ran. I don't even remember getting in my car. The next thing I knew, I was halfway home, speeding like my life depended on it. I don't know what that thing was. I don't know if it was ever my manager, but I do know that the gas station was empty when I drove away. The cameras don't show anyone. The store records don't list a manager by that name, as if he never existed. And now, there's a new voicemail on my phone. I haven't listened to it yet, but I know what I'll hear. Breathe in, and maybe this time, it'll say something new. I don't think I'll be safe anywhere, because whatever this is, it followed me home. I was visiting my cousin in a small town in Oregon, a place with one main street and a handful of side roads. She worked late shifts at a diner, so I'd often wander around in the evenings, exploring. One night, I found an alley I hadn't noticed before. It was tucked between a hardware store and an old laundromat. The thing was, I had walked that street earlier, and I swore there had been no alley there. But now, between the two buildings, there was a narrow passageway lined with old bricks leading into the dark. It looked like a shortcut, so I took it. As soon as I stepped in, the sound of the town faded. No cars, no voices from the street, just silence. The air smelled damp, like old stone after rain, though the pavement was dry. The alley should have led out onto the next street, but it didn't. It just kept going. I walked for maybe 3 minutes before I started feeling weird. The buildings on either side didn't match anything in the town, dark, windowless structures that seemed older than the rest. When I turned around, expecting to see the street I came from, it was gone. Just more alley stretching behind me. My stomach dropped. I walked faster. The further I went, the more the air felt thick, heavy, like pushing through water. I tried running, but no matter how far I went, there was no end, just the same endless passage. The brick walls looked warped now, curving inward slightly, and there was a faint sound, like breathing, but not my own. Panic set in. I turned, ready to run back the way I came, when I saw something move ahead. A shadow, too large and too slow to be a person, gliding across the bricks. I don't know why, but I felt like if it saw me, I wouldn't leave that alley. I closed my eyes and whispered, "This isn't real, this isn't real." I turned sharply, trying to retrace my steps. The ground beneath me felt wrong, like I was stepping on something softer than pavement, but I ran anyway, not looking back. Then, just like that, I stumbled forward and I was back on the main street. The alley behind me was gone. It wasn't a dead end or a wall, just two buildings pressed together as if no alley had ever been there. I stood there, shaking, trying to catch my breath. The car honked as it passed. The sounds of town returning as if nothing had happened, but I knew what I saw. I knew what I felt. I didn't tell my cousin right away. I didn't tell anyone, actually. It felt ridiculous, like a half-remembered dream, something my mind had twisted in the dark. But the feeling stayed with me. That deep, gut-wrenching certainty that if I had stayed in that alley just a second longer, I wouldn't have left. A week passed. I kept my evening walks limited to well-lit areas, avoiding even the thought of side streets. But something about that night still gnawed at me. Then, late one evening, my cousin and I were sitting on our porch, drinking cheap beer, when she spoke up. "You've been acting weird," she said. I hesitated, then decided to tell her. Not everything, just that I found an alley that didn't make sense, that it stretched in a way it shouldn't have. She didn't laugh. She didn't even blink. Instead, she set down her bottle and asked, "Which street?" I told her, then that's when she got really quiet. After a long pause, she said, "You're not the first." I felt my stomach drop. Apparently, a few people, mostly out-of-towners, had mentioned something similar over the years. Not always an alley, exactly, but places that shouldn't be there. A basement door and a store that led to more stairs than should have fit. The gas station bathroom that somehow opened opened into another building, and, most unsettling, a kid who ran ahead of his parents one night, ducking into a narrow passageway between two shops and never coming out. His parents swore they were only seconds behind him, but by the time they reached the gap between the buildings, it was gone. Could have been a kidnapping, my cousin admitted, but there's never been proof. No cameras, no evidence of an abduction, just ... going. I sat there, cold despite the warm air. Did anyone ever find their way back? I asked. She hesitated. A few, she said finally. Not always right away. Sometimes they turn up miles away, no idea how they got there. Sometimes it's years later, but they don't remember a thing. The thought said to chill up my spine. That night, I dreamed about the alley, but it wasn't just one. There were many stretchy like veins through the town. Some led underground, some twisted upward, into spaces where no buildings should be. And something moved in them, something that saw me. When I woke up, my feet were dirty, as if I'd been walking. I left the next day. I haven't been back since, but sometimes, when I'm in a new city, I catch sight of a street that shouldn't be there. A turn I swear wasn't on the map. It's been 3 years since I left that town, but the feeling has never left me. That gnawing awareness, the instinct I've sharpened over time, the ability to sense when something isn't right. And then, last month, I slipped. I was in Chicago for work, staying in a hotel near the river. It was late, but I needed to clear my head, so I went for a walk. I stuck to main streets, just like I always do, but then I saw it. A break in the row of buildings, a narrow passage that I knew wasn't supposed to be there. It looked like any other alley, bricks damp from rain, a few dumpsters along the walls. But I felt it, that pull, that strange, heavy silence. The air was too still. I should have walked away, but I didn't. I stepped closer, peering in. The bricks looked old, older than the city itself, and something about the way the light hit the far end, it wasn't quite right. Like it didn't end, not really. Like the space stretched just a little too far. I felt that same sinking, leaden sensation in my gut, the same wrongness, and then the ground shifted. I don't mean it felt like it moved. It actually did. The pavement under my feet rolled, like stepping onto something alive. I stumbled back, gripping the edge of the nearest building. That's when I saw it. The brickwork at the far end of the alley, it shivered, it breathed, and then, just for a second, I saw something ... open. A gap, a split in the darkness, a space that wasn't supposed to exist, and behind it, something was looking at me. I don't know what it was. I don't want to, but I saw movement, a shifting, stretching thing, like a shadow unpeeling itself from the wall. I felt it watching me, assessing me. I didn't wait. I turned and ran. I didn't stop until I was back in my hotel, the door locked behind me, my heart hammering in my chest. My hands were shaking. My shoes were wet, though it hadn't rained. I sat on the floor, staring at the door, trying to convince myself that I hadn't seen what I thought I had, that it hadn't seen me back. But then, at 3:12 a.m., my phone buzzed. One notification. No number, no contact name, just a message. You came back. I left Chicago the next morning. I don't know if it's following me, if it's waiting, if one day I'll step onto the wrong street and I won't be able to turn back. I was working as a part-time janitor at a mid-sized shopping mall in my hometown. It was nothing fancy, just the kind of place where half the stores were either discount clothing shops or independent phone repair kiosks. It was outdated, barely hanging on, and always smelled vaguely of pretzels and stale carpet cleaner. My shift was the overnight cleanup, 10 p.m. to 6 a.m. The mall technically closed at 9. But with slow stragglers and stores doing late stocking, we never had the place entirely empty before 10:30 or so. My job was simple: walk the mall, check for trash, mop up spills, and make sure all the entry doors were properly locked. There were security guards too, but they mostly stayed near the cameras or handled shoplifters. One night, about a month into the job, I was doing my usual rounds when I noticed something weird. The food court still had its lights on, not just the safety lights, but full, bright, business hour lighting. The thing was, the entire food court had been closed for an hour. I'd seen the last guy from the sandwich shop leave. I radioed my supervisor, Ted. Hey, food court's still lit up. Should I flip the switches? There was a pause. Then Ted, who had worked at the mall for over 15 years, responded, just leave it. Why, it'll turn off. I was about to ask what that meant, but he cut off the conversation by telling me to check the restrooms. I was too tired to argue, so I moved on. But as I walked away, I could swear I heard the faintest sound of trays sliding on tables. Over the next few weeks, I started to notice other strange things. Some nights, the escalators would still be running, even though they were always shut off at closing time. I'd tell Ted, and he'd just say the same thing. Leave it. It'll stop. One night, I passed by an empty toy store and saw a single wind-up car rolling in circles on the floor. No one was there. Another time, I walked through the main corridor and saw one of the old payphones. Yes, we still had those, dangling off the hook. I picked it up and was about to hang it up, but before I could, I swear to God I heard someone breathing on the other end. I slammed it down and speed walked out of there. Then came the night I almost quit. It was around 3 a.m. and I had just finished cleaning the men's restroom. I walked out into the main hall, looked down toward the food court, and froze. The tables weren't empty anymore. Every seat was filled with people. Not normal people, though. They were all sitting completely still. No food, no drinks, just sitting. Their backs were straight, their hands resting on the tables, fingers perfectly still. I took a step forward, my heartbeat hammering, and, as one, they turned their heads toward me. It wasn't a quick motion, it was slow and synchronized, like they were on some kind of track. Their faces weren't quite right. The mouths were too small, the eyes too wide. Then, as if on some silent cue, they all smiled. It was the kind of smile that showed way too many teeth. I turned and ran. When I told Ted what I saw, he didn't even look surprised. He just sighed, muttered something under his breath, and told me to take my break early. A week later, I quit. Years later, I ran into an old coworker from that job. I asked him if anything weird ever happened at the mall. He just chuckled nervously and said, "You ever notice how they never really lock the doors, even after closing?" I nodded. "Well," he said, scratching his head, "that's cause something else is still shopping. I should have let it go. Should have left the memories in the past." But a few nights ago, I found myself parked outside that same mall. It was late, around midnight. I hadn't been back in years, but I was driving through town and couldn't resist stopping to see if the place was still standing. From the outside, it looked even more run down than I remembered. The neon welcome sign above the entrance flickered weakly, and half the parking lot lights were out. It was supposed to be closed, and yet, as I sat there in my car, watching, the automatic doors slid open. Not like a gust of wind had triggered them. They opened smoothly, intentionally, like the mall was inviting me in. I should have left, but I didn't. Maybe it was nostalgia. Maybe it was unfinished business. Maybe I just wanted to prove to myself that what I saw all those years ago wasn't real. I stepped inside. The place smelled exactly the same. Stale carpet, food court grease, cheap perfume from the makeup kiosks. The overhead speakers still played that weird, tinny mall music, looping a decade-old pop song at low volume. And then I noticed something that made my skin crawl. The directory map. You know those big mall maps near the entrance, the ones with the red "You Are Here" dot. This one was wrong. I remembered the layout. The old bookstore should have been on the left, across from the shoe store. But on the map, there was no bookstore. In its place was a store I didn't recognize, something called Friendly Finds. I turned my head to check in real life. The bookstore was gone. In its place was a completely unfamiliar storefront. Its glass display filled with random objects, a baby's rattle, an old rotary phone, a cracked snow globe, things that didn't belong together. The cold, creepy dread settled over me. This mall was changing. I took a few hesitant steps down the main corridor. The lights above flickered, but they weren't going out. They were shifting. The warm yellow glow of the mall's old fluorescent bulb started to turn a sickly green. The tiles under my feet felt slightly softer, like I was stepping on something that wasn't quite solid. And then I heard it, a voice crackling over the mall speakers. "Attention shoppers, a special sale is happening now." My stomach dropped. "Come find what you're missing." The words were wrong, not just what they said, but how they sounded, like a voice that had heard human speech, but didn't fully understand it. I took a shaky breath and turned back toward the entrance. I had to leave. No, except the entrance was gone. The big glass doors I had walked through were no longer there. Instead, there was just a blank wall, stretching endlessly in both directions. I backed up, my breathing quickening. This wasn't a mall anymore. Not really. A rustling sound made me turn toward the food court. They were there again. Not just sitting this time. They were standing. Dozens of them, their two wide eyes fixed on me, their heads slightly tilted. Their expressions were wrong, like they were trying to mimic human emotions but didn't quite understand how faces were supposed to work. One of them, the closest one, took a step forward, then another, then another. They were moving slowly, deliberately, not chasing, not running, just advancing, like they knew I had nowhere to go. I turned and sprinted down the corridor, past the closed storefronts, past the unfamiliar kiosks that hadn't been there before. The air was getting thick, the floor even softer, like I was running on something that wasn't quite finished forming. Up ahead, I saw an old department store entrance, the kind that used to anchor the mall, back when people still shopped here. Its security gate was halfway open, like someone had forgotten to pull it down all the way. I didn't think, I just dove under it. Inside the store, everything was silent. No music, no rustling, just rows of mannequins, frozen in various poses. Some dressed, some completely bare. I took a slow step forward, my breath ragged. Somewhere deep in the store, I saw a door. Not an emergency exit, not an employee entrance, just a plain, unmarked door. One I was sure had never been there before. Behind me, I heard something shuffle under the security gate. I didn't wait. I ran. I reached the door, grabbed the handle, and yanked it open. For one awful moment, I thought it would lead nowhere, that it would open into more endless mall, more shifting corridors, more that, but instead, it lit outside. I stumbled into the cold night air, gasping gasping. I was outside. The mall was behind me, looking exactly the same as when I'd arrived. The glass doors were back. The parking lot was empty. The welcome sign still flickered weakly, except now I noticed something else. The entire time I'd been inside, not once had I seen my reflection, not in the storefront windows, not in the polished tile floors, not even in the glass of the directory map. Like the mall hadn't fully decided if I was really there. I don't know what would have happened if I'd stayed. I should have left town after that. Should have driven straight through the night without stopping, without looking back. But I didn't. Something about the whole thing gnawed at me. How had the mall changed like that? Why was it still? Where? Had it always been like this? Even when I worked there? Was I just too blind to notice? I needed answers. Ted still worked there. It took a few phone calls, but I finally tracked him down through an old coworker. He'd been promoted to head of maintenance. The guy was in his 60s now, and when I showed up at his house, he just shook his head before I could even say a word. He went back, "Didn't you?" I didn't even have to answer. He sighed, motioned for me to sit, and cracked open a beer. "You want to know how long that mail's been off?" he asked. I frowned. Ted took a sip, thinking, when I started there, place was already weird. That was in '98. Back then, it was little stuff, lights turning on when they shouldn't, escalators moving when the power was cut. But it's gotten worse. Started changing shape about 10 years ago. People started seeing things, hearing things. I swallowed hard. "What is it?" I asked. Ted just shrugged. "Dunno, but I'll tell you this." He leaned forward, voice lower now. "You ever wonder why this mall hasn't been demolished yet?" He had a point. The place had been on its last legs for years. Other malls had closed, turned into Amazon warehouses or office spaces. But not this one. It just kept hanging on. They tried to tear it down once. Ted continued. Back in 2015, brought in a whole crew, but the plans got screwed up. The foreman quit. One of the demo guys went missing. Then the company just dropped it. Wouldn't touch the place. I felt a chill run down my spine. But the real weird parts. Ted took another sip of his beer. "Nobody remembers when it was built." I blinked. "What? The mall?" He said. "There's no records. No grand opening photos. No news articles about it being built. I checked city archives once, out of curiosity. It's just there, like it always was." I was silent for a long time, letting that sink in. Finally, I asked, "Has anyone ever gotten stuck in there?" Ted looked at me for a long time. Then he nodded, slow and deliberate. A few times, he admitted, they go in after hours. Sometimes security finds them wandering, dazed, confused, talking nonsense, like they were somewhere else. He leaned in closer, his expression grim. "But sometimes, we don't find him at all." A cold, hollow fear settled in my gut. Ted finished his beer and set the gun down. "Look, I don't know what you saw. I don't know why it let you out. But take my advice, don't go back." I wanted to argue. I wanted to press him for more details, for something concrete. But the look in his eyes told me he wouldn't say any more. So I left. I should have listened. But that night, I drove back. Not inside, not close, just to the parking lot. The mall was dark, its usual flickering neon sign glowing weakly. It looked normal, empty. But as I sat there in my car, I noticed something. The glass doors, they were slightly open, and just past them, standing perfectly still in the dimly lit corridor, was a figure. Not moving, not waving, just standing there, watching me. I didn't stay to see what it wanted. I peeled out of that lot so fast my tires screeched. That was 3 days ago. I haven't been back. But last night, around 3 a.m., I woke up to a sound outside my apartment. A familiar sound. The faint, tinny echo of mall music. This happened about a year ago, and to this day, I can't explain it. I've told a few people, but most just dismiss it as a prank or a coincidence. I know better. I was house sitting for my aunt and uncle while they were on vacation. They live in a quiet neighborhood, the kind where nothing ever happens. Their house is a little older, but cozy. Nothing eerie about it. The first couple of nights were uneventful. I worked remotely during the day, walked their dog in the evening, and watched TV at night. The only thing I found weird was the landline phone in their kitchen. It was an old rotary model that they hadn't used in years. They had a cordless phone for the few times they needed a landline, but this one, it was just sitting there, completely unplugged from the wall. My aunt said they kept it because it was a family heirloom. On the third night, I was brushing my teeth when I heard it. A ringing phone, a real, old-school, shrill ring. I turned off the faucet and listened. The cordless phone was on the counter. It wasn't that. My heart pounded as I slowly stepped into the kitchen. The rotary phone was ringing. I froze. It wasn't plugged in. There was no way it should be making a sound. For a moment, I thought I was imagining it, but it kept going. 3 rings. 4. I did the dumbest thing I could have done. I picked it up. The second I did, the ringing stopped. The line was silent, but I swear I could hear breathing, slow and steady, like someone was on the other end, just waiting. Hello. My voice came out shaky. A pause. Then a whisper, "You're in my house." I dropped the phone and ran. I didn't stop until I was outside with the dog, standing in the middle of the driveway, my heart hammering against my ribs. The kitchen light was still on. The phone sat on the counter, unmoving. It didn't ring again. I stayed at a friend's that night. The next day, I went back in daylight. Nothing was out of place. The phone sat there, as old and silent as ever. When my aunt and uncle came home, I told them everything. My uncle just laughed it off. My aunt, though, went pale. She told me that phone had belonged to my grandmother. She had used it every day, right up until she passed. She had a habit of calling family members just to check in, even when there was nothing to say. A week after my aunt and uncle returned, I was still shaken. The logical part of my brain told me it had to be some weird prank or a stress-induced hallucination, but deep down, I knew better. I wouldn't go back to their house for a while. Every time I thought about it, my skin crawled. But then, one evening, my aunt called. "Hey, could you stop by tomorrow?" she asked. I found something weird, and, well, I thought you should see it. Her voice was tight, like she didn't really want to say it over the phone. I hesitated. "Is it about the phone?" A long pause. Then, "Just come by, please." The next day, I arrived, heart pounding. The house felt different, not haunted, exactly, just wrong. My aunt was waiting in the kitchen, looking more nervous than I'd ever seen her. She pointed to the counter. There was a notepad sitting next to the rotary phone. "I keep this for grocery lists," she said. I didn't touch it for weeks, but this morning, I found this. She stepped back, letting me see. There, in shaky, almost childlike handwriting, was a single sentence. "I want to come home." I swallowed hard. "You think?" She cut me off with a small shake of her head. "I don't know." My uncle still thought it was a prank, maybe one of their friends messing around. But my aunt, she looked scared. We agreed to get rid of the phone, not just put it away, get rid of it. I offered to take it to a thrift store, but my aunt insisted on something else. "I don't want it in anyone's home," she whispered. That night, we drove out to an empty field and buried it. I thought that was the end of it, and maybe it should have been. But 3 days later, I woke up to a call on my cell. Unknown number. I hesitated but answered. "Hello." Nothing, just static. And then, in that same whispery voice, "You shouldn't have done that." I hung up immediately. I checked my call log. No record of the number. No missed call. Just silence. I haven't heard from it since. But sometimes, late at night, when everything is quiet, I swear I can hear it. I tried to convince myself that it was over, that it had been some strange coincidence or a bizarre, one-time event. But the feeling of being watched never quite left me. Every now and then, in the dead of night, I'd wake up feeling like something was listening. Waited. Then, 2 weeks later, my aunt called again. "Did you dig it up?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. I felt my stomach drop. "What? No. Why would I do that?" She hesitated. "It's back." I gripped my phone tighter. "What do you mean it's back?" "The phone, it's on the kitchen counter. Same spot. Like we never touched it." I felt cold all over. My first instinct was to tell her to throw it out, but what good had that done the first time? My aunt sounded exhausted, like she hadn't slept since we buried the thing. I told her I'd come over. I didn't want to, but I needed to see it with my own eyes. When I got there, the house was silent. My uncle wasn't home, just my aunt standing in the kitchen, staring at the phone. And there it was, the old rotary phone, sitting exactly where it had been before, untouched. Waited. I stepped closer, my skin crawling. "Did you tell anyone where we buried it?" "No," my aunt whispered. "Not even your uncle." I reached out and lifted the receiver. For a moment, nothing happened, just silence. Then, in that awful, whispery voice, "You can't bury me." I slammed the phone down so hard the entire counter shook. My aunt and I just stood there, staring at the thing. Neither of us spoke. I could feel my heart pounding in my throat. That was when the phone rang. We both jumped. The shrill, old-fashioned ring filled the kitchen, impossibly loud. I grabbed my aunt's arm. "We're leaving." "No." She didn't argue. We left the house and didn't go back until my uncle got home. He thought we were being ridiculous, but agreed to get rid of the phone. This time, he was the one who took it. Said he'd dump it at a scrapyard. We didn't ask questions. For a while, everything was quiet. I stopped waking up to that eerie feeling of being watched. The air in my aunt's house felt lighter. Whatever was attached to that phone was finally gone. Or so we thought. Last night, I woke up at 3:12 a.m. to the sound of a phone ringing. I bolted upright, heart hammering. My cell was on my nightstand, silent, no notifications. But I could still hear it. The sound was muffled, distant, like it was coming from inside the walls, or beneath the floorboards. This happened to me about 2 years ago at a shopping mall I had never been to before. I had driven a couple of hours to a neighboring town to meet up with a friend, but they canceled at the last minute. Since I was already there, I figured I'd check out the local mall. It wasn't anything fancy, just one of those older, slightly run down malls that still had a few decent stores but mostly felt forgotten. I parked near one of the entrances and made a mental note of where I came in. The entrance led straight into a small food court with a couple of open restaurants and a few closed off spaces with metal grates pulled down. There were people around, not a lot, but enough that I didn't feel alone. I wandered for a bit, checking out stores here and there, but after about an hour, I started feeling off. Not scared, not paranoid, just off. I figured maybe I was hungry, so I decided to head back to the food court. That's when I noticed something weird. The layout was different. I was positive I had come in near a burger place and a smoothie stand, but now the burger place was gone. The smoothie stand was still there, but in its place was a different restaurant I didn't recognize. I second guessed myself. Maybe I had taken a wrong turn. Maybe there was another food court, but that didn't make sense. I'd been paying attention. I pulled out my phone to check my location, but for some reason, my GPS showed me as being a couple of blocks away outside the mall. I tried refreshing it, but it wouldn't update. No service. Annoyed, I decided to just find an exit and get back to my car. That's when I noticed something else. The stores I had passed earlier weren't where they should have been. I clearly remembered seeing a bookstore with a big 50% off sign in the window. Now, that space was a shoe store. I know malls can have similar layouts, but this wasn't just a matter of me being confused. Entire stores were different. The people walking around didn't seem to notice anything wrong, though. I stopped a woman passing by and asked where the nearest exit was. She smiled and said, "Oh, they close those doors after dark. You have to go through the main one." Dark. I looked up. The skylight showed a pitch black sky. It had been around 4 p.m. when I got here. There was no way it was night already. My stomach dropped. I thanked her and tried to act normal, but I was definitely not calm. I hurried toward what I hoped was the main exit she mentioned, but every time I turned a corner, the hallway stretched just a little too long. The store's just a little too unfamiliar. The lighting seemed dimmer. I kept walking, my heart pounding, until finally I saw an old department store entrance with a set of glass doors leading outside. I nearly ran toward it. The parking lot was there. My car was there. Everything looked normal. I pushed through the doors and stepped out into the cool air. The moment I crossed the threshold, my phone buzzed. I had service again. At the time, 4:17 p.m. I turned back to look at the mall. Through the glass doors, I could still see the inside, but now the layout was exactly how I remembered it when I first walked in. The burger place, the bookstore, everything. I got in my car and drove away as fast as I could. I never went back to that mall. I tried looking it up later, but I couldn't find any reports of anything weird happening there. Maybe it was just me. Maybe I was overtired, but I knew what I saw. And for a little while, that may have was wrong. A few weeks after my experience at the mall, I started having these vivid dreams. They weren't nightmares exactly, but they unsettled me in a way I couldn't shake. In the dreams, I was back in that mall, but it was always slightly different, like it was trying to make itself familiar to me, but getting small details wrong. The colors of the walls would shift, the store names were just gibberish, and the people didn't have faces. They moved like they were acting out a script, looping the same gestures over and over. Every time, I'd walk toward the exit, only for the mall to stretch longer, forcing me to take another path. I always woke up before I found my way out. Then, one day, I woke up to a notification on my phone. The calendar reminder. The problem was, I didn't set it. It simply said, "Time to come back." The location. That same mall. At first, I thought maybe it was some weird spam or a glitch, but when I checked my calendar app, there was no record of the event. It was just gone, like I had imagined it. I told myself it was just a coincidence. Maybe my brain was playing tricks on me because I was still thinking about what happened. But then the dream started happening while I was awake. I'd be sitting at work, staring at my computer screen, and for just a second, I'd see the mall around me. The dim lighting, the endless hallways, the way the store signs flickered between names like they couldn't decide what they were. It always snapped back to reality just as quickly, leaving me with this nauseating sense of displacement, like I had just been somewhere else for a split second. Then, a few nights ago, I made a mistake. I was driving home late and, out of curiosity, I decided to check my GPS to see how far that mall was from where I was. Just to say, the map showed it was 0 miles away. I nearly slammed on the brakes. I was in the middle of the highway, nowhere near the mall. There was no way I was at the same location, but my GPS insisted I was there. Then, my radio, set to a normal station, cut out. The static wasn't wasn't loud, but beneath it, I swore I could hear something. It wasn't a voice, exactly, or like a layered murmur of sounds, as if 100 people were speaking at once, but I couldn't understand any of them. I turned off the radio and kept driving. I didn't look at my GPS again. That was 2 nights ago, and now I'm scared to fall asleep, because the last time I did, I woke up somewhere I didn't recognize. Not my bed, not my room, just an empty corridor, the floors tiled, the air filled with that artificial scent of stale pretzels and cleaning solution. I didn't sleep the next night, or the night after that. Every time I closed my eyes, I felt pulled, not just in a dreamlike way, but physically, like something was trying to drag me back to that place. By the 3rd day without sleep, I was a mess. I felt like I was losing time, my vision blurred at the edges, and my thoughts came in disjointed fragments. But the fear kept me awake. I knew, deep in my gut, that if I fell asleep again, I might not wake up in my bed this time. And then last night, it happened. I must have dozed off. I don't remember falling asleep. I was just sitting on my couch, trying to keep myself awake. But the next thing I knew, I was standing in the middle. No transition, no warning, just there. The air smelled like it always did, stale and slightly too cold, like a place that had been air conditioned forever. The skylights showed only darkness, but I didn't know if it was night or if they just didn't lead outside. I turned slowly, my breath coming too fast. The mall was empty, silent. The stores were there, but their signs flickered like broken neon. Some of them changed right in front of me, letters scrambling into nonsense before settling on names I didn't recognize. And then I heard it. Not a voice, not footsteps, but something else. A rustling sound, like fabric dragging across the tile. It came from behind me. I didn't turn around. I walked forward, forcing myself to move, keeping my breathing steady. The stores around me shifted as I passed them. 1 second, they were normal, and the next, they were hollow, empty spaces with nothing inside. The walls seemed to pulse, like they were breathing. Then I saw something ahead. The exit. The same glass doors I had escaped through before. The parking lot was visible, my car sitting right where I left it. I ran. The mall stretched, trying to pull me back. The floor beneath me felt soft, like walking through deep sand, but I forced myself forward. The doors were closer now, and then something whispered my name, right behind me. I didn't look. I wouldn't look. I reached the doors, slammed my hands against them, and pushed, and I was awake, back on my couch. My heart felt like it was about to explode out of my chest. My hands were shaking so hard I could barely move. I looked around, expecting to see something wrong, but everything was normal. The only proof that anything had happened was my phone, sitting on the coffee table. The screen was on, a notification. You left something behind. No sender, no apps, just those words. I haven't slept since. I don't know what happens if it catches me. I don't want to find out, but I can feel it. This happened when I was about 12, and I still think about it every time I see an old playground. I don't know if it was just some weird trick of memory or if something genuinely wrong happened that day, but I swear something was waiting for me. There was an old playground at the edge of my neighborhood, right before the woods started. It had a rusted jungle gym, a couple of swings, and one of those merry-go-rounds that nobody made anymore, the kind that would spin too fast and send kids flying if they weren't careful. I hadn't been there in years. By the time I was 12, most kids had abandoned it for video games or the newer park across town. But one summer afternoon, I was walking home from a friend's house and felt this weird urge to stop by, just for a second. The second I stepped onto the sand, the air changed. It was the middle of the day, but the sunlight felt dull, like someone had turned the brightness down just a little too much. The heat should have made the metal equipment unbearable, but everything was cold. The merry-go-round sat in the middle, tilted slightly like it had sunk into the sand over the years. Without thinking, I stepped onto it, and it moved. I didn't push it. There was no wind, but it creaked forward just a little. I hopped off immediately, heart hammering. That's when I noticed the footprints. They weren't fresh. They were deep, old impressions in the sand, but they led directly to the merry-go-round. There were no footprints leading away. I told myself it was nothing. Maybe they had been there for weeks, pressed down by rain or time, but they were so sharp, like someone had just stepped off before I arrived. I backed away and turned to leave, but the swings moved, not like they were caught in the wind. They were moving with force, both at the same time, like two invisible kids were kicking off, going higher and higher. The chains creaked, the kind of sound metal makes when it's being used. I ran so fast I nearly tripped in the sand, but before I made it to the sidewalk, something whispered behind me. Not a word, not a name, just the sound of breath. I never went back, and here's the worst part. The next time I walked past that park, I saw something that still makes my stomach drop. The footprints were gone. For years, I tried to convince myself it was just my imagination. Maybe the footprints were never there in the first place. Maybe the swings had been moving because of some weird air current. Maybe the whisper had been the wind, but I never really believed that. I avoided the playground completely after that. If I had to walk home from a friend's house house, I took the long way. If I was in a car, I turned my head the other way. I never told anyone what happened. What would I even say? A playground scared me once, but the thing is, it never stopped waiting. I was 16 the next time I saw it. It was late, maybe 9 or 10 p.m. I was riding in the passenger seat of my mom's car. She had just picked me up from a school event, and we were heading home, driving past the playground. I told myself not to look. I looked anyway, and I swear on my life, something was on that merry-go-round. It wasn't a person, not exactly. It was just a shape, a dark outline, hunched low like it was crouching or waiting for something. I only saw it for a split second before the car passed, but it was enough. It knew I had seen it. I felt my stomach flip, my entire body go cold. My mom must have noticed because she asked if I was feeling okay. I told her I was fine. What else could I say? I barely slept that night. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw that shape, and I remembered the footprints, the ones that had led away. Had it followed me? Had it just been sitting there, waiting for me to come back? Or worse, had it left the playground entirely? I told myself I wouldn't look again, but I did. I was 19 the last time I saw it. I had been away at college and hadn't thought about that playground in years. But one winter break, I was driving home late at night, alone this time, and the roads were empty. The sky was a deep, endless black. I didn't even realize where I was until I saw it, the old playground, half buried in snow, and the merry-go-round was spinning. There was no wind, no footprints, no sign of anyone. It just turned, slowly, like something had just pushed off. And then, as I watched, it stopped, dead still, like it had finally noticed me. I ran the red lights. I didn't care. That was the last time I ever saw the playground, or at least, the last time I let it see me. I wish that had been the end of it. For years, I told myself it was over, that whatever was in that playground had stayed there, locked in its rusted cage of sand and silence. And for a long time, it seemed true. Until last month. I live in a different city now, hundreds of miles away. New apartment, new job, new life. The playground is a distant memory, just another eerie story I try not to think about. But it must have been thinking about me. It started small. I was walking home from work one evening, taking a shortcut through a quiet residential area, the kind with big trees and perfectly manicured yards. I wasn't paying attention, just listening to music, when I noticed something out of the corner of my eye. A swing set, not a playground, just a single swing set in someone's yard. Old, rusted, the kind that probably hadn't been used in years. But as I walked past, one of the swings moved, not wildly, not as if pushed by wind, just a slow, deliberate sway. I told myself it was nothing, picked up my pace, and didn't look back. But then it happened again. A week later, I was out for a late night drive when I passed an empty lot with an abandoned merry-go-round. It wasn't moving, until it was. A slow, creaking spin, just like before. I stared at it too long to pretend I hadn't seen, too long to pretend it hadn't seen me. Now, I see them everywhere. A jungle gym behind a school with no kids on it, but something shifting in the shadows beneath it. A plastic playhouse outside a daycare, its little door swinging open, though there was no one there to touch it. A lone seesaw in an overgrown park, dipping down, like something invisible had just climbed on it. It's not the playground anymore. It's not waiting for me there. It's followed me. It's everywhere. And last night, I woke up to a sound that made my stomach drop. A creak. A slow, rhythmic creak. The sound of metal moving. I sat up in bed, heart pounding. The room was dark, silent, but outside, just outside my window, was the small park at the edge of my apartment complex. I told myself not to look. I looked, and there, just barely visible in the dim glow of the streetlights, was the old swing set. One of the swings was moving. I work a night shift, and my drive home takes me past a few gas stations and strip malls, most of them dark and empty after midnight, but there's one small convenience store on my route that stays open 24 hours. I had only stopped there a couple of times, once for a coffee, another for some painkillers when I had a headache. The place always felt off. Not bad, exactly, just strange. There was never anyone at the counter when I walked in. The cashier would appear from the back, always looking slightly surprised to see me. They were different people every time, but they all had the same vacant, two wide eyes. One night, I decided to stop there again for an energy drink. I was the only customer. The store was silent, no background music, no buzzing from the refrigerators, nothing. I grabbed my drink and walked up to the counter, but no one was there. Hello, I called. A few seconds later, a woman stepped out from the back. She wore the same uniform as the other cashiers I'd seen, but her name tag was blank. She didn't speak as she scanned my drink. When I tapped my card to pay, she tilted her head slightly like she was listening to something. That's when I noticed the security monitors behind her. They showed multiple angles of the store, aisles, the entrance, even the parking lot outside. But one of the screens was different. It showed a view of the road outside, the road I had just driven on. I watched as my own car appeared on the screen, rolling up to the store. The timestamp was real time and it was showing me arriving, but the longer I stared, the more I noticed the details were wrong. My headlights were off. The road behind my car was darker than it should have been, like the world stopped existing past that point. And then, as I watched, the driver's side door of my car opened. I was still standing inside the store. I turned to the cashier. She was staring at me, her mouth slightly open, like she was trying to speak but couldn't. Behind me, the automatic doors of the store slid open. I read. I don't even remember yanking my drink off the counter. I just bolted to my car, the real one, the one outside. I threw myself in, locked the doors, and peeled out of the lot. I glanced in the rearview mirror as I sped off. The store was still there, glowing under the streetlights. The glass doors had closed. For weeks after that night, I avoided that stretch of road. I took a longer route home, one that added 10 minutes to my drive but kept me far away from that store. I tried to convince myself I had imagined it, the wrong details on the screen, the way the cashier watched me, the impossible sight of my own car door opening. But then, one night, I saw it again. Not the store itself. I was nowhere near it. I was on my usual detour, a quiet residential road that curved through a neighborhood. It was late, and the only lights came from scattered porch lamps and the occasional passing car. And then, as I rounded a bend, I saw the store. It was just there, standing at the edge of a cul-de-sac where no store should be. Same neon glow, same glass doors. My heart slammed into my ribs. It couldn't be real. I had avoided it. It wasn't supposed to be here. I kept driving, speeding past without looking directly at it. My hands were clenched so tightly on the wheel that my fingers ached. I didn't slow down until I was miles away, my pulse still hammering. I told myself it was a coincidence. Maybe a different store, one that just looked the same. Maybe my lack of sleep was messing with me. Then I started seeing it more often. Once on a highway exit that I knew hadn't been there before. Another time on a back road near my workplace, just sitting in an empty lot like it had always belonged. Each time, it was identical, the same blank-eyed cashier standing behind the counter, the same silent security screens, the same feeling that something inside was watching. The last time I saw it was the worst. I had just pulled into my driveway. It was nearly 3 a.m. and I was exhausted. I grabbed my bag from the passenger seat and stepped out of the car and realized I wasn't standing in front of my house. The pavement beneath my feet wasn't my driveway. The air smelled wrong, artificial, like stale air conditioning. I turned slowly. The convenience store stood behind me. The automatic doors slid open and the cashier, standing just inside, smiled. I ran. I don't remember unlocking my car or slamming the door shut. I just remember flooring it, my tires screeching as I reversed into the street. I didn't look back, not even once. I don't know how I got home, but when I finally made it inside, I locked every door, every window, and stayed awake until the sun came up. I haven't seen the store since that night. Maybe it gave up on me. Maybe it moved on to someone else. I don't know what's worse, the fact that the store stopped appearing, or the feeling that it hasn't really left. For a while, things were normal, or at least as normal as they could be after something like that. I stuck to my longer route home. I triple-checked my locks every night, and I stopped looking too closely at dark intersections and empty parking lots, afraid I'd see the store waiting there. But then, little things started happening. My phone's GPS would glitch, telling me to turn down roads that didn't exist. I'd check my rearview mirror at night and swear I saw a neon glow in the distance. Just for a second, my security cameras at home would send me motion alerts at odd hours, but when I checked the footage, there was nothing. Just stillness. And then, 2 weeks ago, I found something on my doorstep. It was a plastic bag, one of those cheap, crinkly ones you get at gas stations. Inside was a single energy drink, the exact brand I bought that night at the store. I stared at it for a long time. I hadn't bought this. I hadn't even seen this brand anywhere since that night. My fingers trembled as I picked it up. The plastic was cold, too cold for something that had been outside. I threw it away immediately. That night, I dreamed of the store. I was inside again, standing at the counter. The cashier was there, watching me with that empty stare. But this time, the security screens behind them weren't showing the aisles. They were showing my house, different angles of my living room, my hallway, my bedroom. The final screen showed me asleep in my bed. I woke up drenched in sweat, my heart pounding so hard it hurt. My room was dark, silent, but the air felt wrong, heavy, like something had just been there. I barely slept after that. Then, last night, my doorbell rang. It was 3:12 a.m. I lay in bed, frozen. My cameras didn't send an alert. My phone didn't buzz with movement outside. I didn't want to check. Every instinct told me not to check, but something pulled me up. Something made me grab my phone, open the security app, and check the live feed. There was no one at the door, no cars in the street, nothing. But just before I closed the app, I noticed something, a faint glow, a neon glow reflecting off the pavement. night. I turned off my phone and I didn't look outside. Alright, but that's it. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, make sure to subscribe to my channel, like this video, and comment something down below. But as always,
Have a nice day.